There's a name that for about 500 years has been a shorthand for cunning, for ruthlessness, and for the dark arts of politics. That name is Machiavelli. But was the man a monster, or was he just a misunderstood realist? To figure that out, we really need to separate the man from the myth. So let me ask you this. When you hear that someone is Machiavellian, what pops into your head? It's a word we throw around a lot, right? And it's usually not a compliment. But what are we actually saying about them?
Well, the dictionary defines it pretty clearly: scheming and unscrupulous. It's basically the idea that the ends justify the means, no matter how dirty those means get. But to really understand why his name got attached to that idea, we have to go back in time and meet the man himself.
Okay, let's go back. Picture this. Florence, 1469. It is the golden age of the Renaissance. The city is just humming with art and power, and it's all under the unofficial rule of the legendary Medici family. This is the world that Niccolò Machiavelli was born into.
Now, the Machiavellis were a pretty prestigious family, but they were kind of on the wrong side of the political tracks. His dad, a lawyer, was hobbled by debt and his opposition to the ruling Medici. What that meant was that young Niccolo's future in public service looked, well, pretty bleak right from the start.
Then, boom, 1498, a political firestorm just rips through Florence. The Medici get exiled, a radical priest named Savonarola rises and falls, and in all that chaos, a 29-year-old Machiavelli suddenly finds that his lack of connections is actually a good thing. He gets his big break and is appointed second chancellor, a really top government job. And for the next 14 years, this wasn't just a job for him. It was his entire life. He poured absolutely everything he had into being a diplomat for the Florentine Republic. And what a life it was. I mean, this guy was thrown into a relentless trial by fire. One year he's negotiating with brutal mercenaries. The next he's face to face with the terrifyingly ambitious Caesar Borgia. He championed this new idea of a citizen army and actually saw it to victory at Pisa. See, this wasn't some abstract political theory for him. This was survival, playing out on the chaotic stage of Renaissance Italy. So after more than a decade right at the center of Florentine power, navigating all this chaos and war, Machiavelli's world was about to be completely and totally shattered. He had given everything to the Florentine Republic. He was the ultimate insider, right? The guy who knew how every single gear of the state turned. But in 1512, it all changed. The political winds shifted, and they shifted violently. Foreign armies swept through Italy, and they left Florence, his beloved city, completely defenseless. And just like that, it was over. The Medici came back to power, and for a man so closely tied to the old republic, the consequences were swift and they were brutal. His fall from grace was total. He was fired, then he was accused of plotting against the new regime, he was thrown in prison, interrogated, and even though he was eventually released, the message was crystal clear: your career is over. He was banished from the city, forced to retire to his small family farm, basically a political ghost. So what does a guy like this do? A man whose entire identity was wrapped up in the political life of his city, and now he's cast out with nothing but time on his hands? Well, he turns to the only thing he has left: his experience and his pen. And this is where his most famous work, The Prince, comes from. It wasn't some grand philosophical masterpiece written for the ages. No. It was a job application. It was a desperate, brilliant, and deeply practical memo to the new Medici rulers designed to prove one thing: I understand power, and you need me. And to prove his point, he basically threw out the entire rulebook of political philosophy. I mean, for centuries, writers had told princes to be good and just and virtuous. Machiavelli, drawing on his 14 years in the trenches, essentially said, that's a lovely idea that will get you killed. In the real world, idealism is a liability. And this leads to his most infamous conclusion: love is fickle, but fear? Fear is a much more reliable tool for control. It wasn't that he thought being evil was good. He just argued that to achieve the greater good of a stable state, a ruler has to be willing to do things that are not, by traditional standards, good. And who was his case study for this new brand of leader? None other than Cesare Borgia, the guy he had watched operate with terrifying efficiency years before. Borgia was cunning, brutal, and effective. Machiavelli didn't just see a monster, he saw a model for how to impose order on chaos. So after pouring all of his experience and intellect into this radical guide to power, what happened? He dedicated it to Lorenzo de' Medici, who, as the story goes, was far more impressed with a pair of hunting dogs he got that same day. Talk about a humiliating anticlimax for one of history's most influential books. So Machiavelli's desperate attempt to get back into politics was a total failure. He would never again hold a position of any real power. But the story, and all its ironies, they don't end there. The final tragedy of his life is also its greatest irony. After years in the political wilderness, he finally got some minor work from the Medici, but then, in 1527, the Medici were overthrown and the Republic was restored. This should have been his moment, right? But the new government saw him as a Medici sympathizer. Trusted by no one, he died just a month later, an outcast from the very Republic he had spent his life trying to serve.
And that's why he leaves us with this huge split in how we see him. On one hand, was he a teacher of evil? Did he literally write a handbook for tyrants? It's easy to see why you'd think that. But on the other hand, you have to remember he also wrote passionate defenses of Republican government. So was he just a realist? Maybe the first person to truly understand that governing requires hard, ugly choices to create a stable state for everyone.
For 500 years, we've been debating that very question. Was Niccolò Machiavelli the devil's advisor, or was he simply the first person brave enough to write down the brutal, uncomfortable truth about power? The answer might just depend on whether you're reading his work from the comfort of a peaceful study or from inside a political storm.